who worked for Herral. There's some fine gentlemen I see out there that I was a little pup when I worked with them, and they were also supportive. Herral and I, we did so much. I was telling the family, I'm African American, if you can't tell, but I was white-knuckled whenever I was in the car with Herral, and he would drive. Help me, Jesus. We would cover fashion shows all over the place, all over the region, in Detroit, the big shows. And he would say, "Oh, Rhonda, I'll drive." I'm like, "Oh, no." But he was my mentor. So, of course, I let him get behind the wheel. And I said, "You know what? I'm just going to pack a little mini Bible in my Gucci bag, and we're going to get there." So we had so much fun. And if you ever were around with Herral, he would also just tell you little stories and tidbits about life, and those nuggets were really precious. So I see some of the guys from the photography department, some now retired, that are here, and I'm going to ask that a couple of them, I know Dave Zapatoski, if you could come on up, and I would like for a couple of the Blade photographers to just say a few words. We also have Bruce Dale, if you're here. So I know I saw Bruce somewhere. Yeah, Bruce, if you could come on up to the microphone, if you don't mind. The family has asked that if you could say just a few words about Herral. And I'll cut you off. I mean, I will play the music like on the Academy Awards. No, I'm just kidding. You can come up and just share briefly a few tidbits at this time. Dave, Bruce, anyone from the... Thank you, Bruce. That's okay.
I just turned something off your head. I wrote this last night and I couldn't print it out and lost it.
Someone said in there.
Okay, my name is Bruce Dale, and Herral had already been working at the Toledo Blade for 8 years when I joined the staff in 1957, I believe. And Herral was very quick to introduce me to his friends and to take me under his wing and to teach me the ropes at the Blade, and he even helped me move into an apartment right next door to where he lived, very strategically located behind the old Park Lane Hotel, but within a few hundred feet of the Mercy School of Nurses. And, they were always well represented at our parties. I see Lee Merkel, our friendship and lives almost ended in, it was 1961 when he and Lee Merkel and I went sailing around midnight, and our boat overturned about 4 miles out in Lake Erie, and fortunately we were rescued by the passing freighter that saw us and raided the Coast Guard about 3 o'clock in the morning. Herral became my mentor. He actually encouraged me to attend workshops at the University of Missouri and at Syracuse University, which is where I met editors from National Geographic for the first time. In 1964, about exactly 50 years ago, we both left the Blade about the same time. I went to National Geographic, and Herral left briefly for a stint at General Motors. We met the following year, well actually later that same year, in New York at the World's Fair, where I could see Herral was really not happy, and what he really missed was for his true love was for photojournalism, and he returned to the Blade very shortly after that. It was a beautiful morning in October in '71 when I joined them for on the shore of Lake Erie next to Marpleville Lighthouse, where he was married to Marcy Studer. As the sun broke on the horizon, the bridesmaids tossed flower petals into the water, and they sort of danced ashore during the wedding vows. They were married by a Catholic priest who was dressed in a very conservative brown suit with a collar, and in deference to Marcy, who had left the nunhood several years earlier. And there was also a large man in a brown frock adorned with crucifixes and roses, rosaries, and great beads, and he looked like he'd stepped right out of the Bible. And I'm sure it was a kind of indifference to Herral's eccentricities. Herral and Marcy were very happy together, and they had a much too short life together. I stayed at the Geographic for 30 years, and I left in '94. Herral continued at the Blade, and probably would still be working there if he didn't give up his job so somebody else could stay there. We kept in touch over the years. I saw him every time I went to visit Toledo. Herral was soft-spoken, and he never bragged about his accomplishments or trials or tribulations, but I would often read about them in some publication. And I'd call him and I'd say, "Herral, what's going on?" And he'd say, "Oh, well, those nutty cops tried to take my cameras away, or they tried to sue me, or they wanted my film." And Herral was a very quiet man, but he was also determined. And when he knew he was right, he didn't back down, and he could not be intimidated, as several of the police departments found out. He was a good friend, and I'll miss him.
I'm Dave Zapatoski, and I'm a photographer at the Blade. I started in 1989, when obviously Herral had been there for a long time. But Herral was very welcoming to me. He was very gracious, very complimentary, said good things, about my work and how nice it was I was at the Blade. One thing I was always struck by was Herral's never-ending passion and enthusiasm for his work. I mean, right up until the end, he was trying to make the best pictures he could make. And I always, to this day, try to think about that and hope that I'm staying as passionate and enthusiastic as Herral was. When I started at the Blade, we still had a dark room. We still shot film and made prints, but the prints were made in a machine, so the photographers never touched chemicals as they did when there was a wet dark room. That said, I heard many stories about Herral in the dark room, sloshing paper in the tray of developer, trying to make the perfect print. And if you were in there with him, you were probably going to get a developer bath as the developer was flying around. When we then moved into scanning and computers, I thought about that because Herral, it seemed to be of the mindset, if one mouse click was a good thing, 10 must be better. And I'm clicking that mouse like no tomorrow. That's not to say he didn't embrace the technology. He did. He always was interested in the latest technology, the latest cameras, but he was as hard on his technology as he was on his cameras. And I still remember he was an early adopter of a personal digital assistant, a PDA, prior to the cell phone. But the screen was smashed to smithereens, but he was still, pecking away with the, I forget what you call the thing that you use with that. Clearly, Herral was an institution in town, and even late, everywhere I went, people would ask about Herral by name, or that photographer with the flowing white hair. I mean, everybody knew him. Herral was very close with Mary Alice Powell, who was the longtime food editor. I don't know that she's here, but he shot a lot of her food pictures. Well, one day I got sent to shoot the food picture, and we would go to her house often to shoot the pictures. And I pull into the driveway, and Mary Alice at the time had an assistant who's literally waiting, hanging out the door. And she sees me pull up, and she shouts into Mary Alice, "It's a Blade photographer, but it's not Herral."
Is there anyone else before we continue the brief program? Anyone else? Thank you so much, Bruce,
Rhonda.
and thank you, Dave.
I got it.
Come on up here.
How are you?
Sharpest man at the Blade.
Herral and I had a quiet
Most of the guys was always teasing me, "No, Harold, did you fix your camera with a hammer today?" Or, you know, like, he was heavy-handed, I think, in things, but I never teased him about his Scientology. But he would tell me more. I learned more about it through Herral. But what the heck is this about? You know, but my favorite story, how long did we work together without changing staff?
About 25 years.
About 25 years. So, you know, you're working in a little teeny room, Herral splashing, as they said, in the early days. But one day, now I won't say, okay. One day, Herral, they're really riding me about, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? And Herral finally turns and he goes, "Where in the heck would I find a nice girl at my age?" And he's about 40 years old. And I remember this as clear as day. It seems like yesterday. I'm going through negatives at the flight table, and I turned and I said, "Have you tried a nunnery?" Nothing else was said. I don't know how much later, Herral announces he's going to get married. And here I am again at the flight table. And I go, "Herral, where the heck did you find a nice lady?" He didn't say a word. He got sheepish like, you know. The guy's finished teasing him. He walks around behind me and he leans over and he says, "She's a former nun." I go, "Really?" And kept right on cutting negatives. That's about it. That's my favorite remembrance of Herral. We had so much fun, really. It was work then. And we met so many people that you can see. And, you know, it was just part of the job. And we enjoyed it.
Those great memories. We'll do this all again at 3 o'clock. Oh, I'm sorry. And someone else who wants to say memory? We're going to go through this run, and please enjoy the food. There's continuous eating. We've already been blessed by the Father, so we're good. The family is setting them up. And then we'll get right to the program.
I'm a little bit late. We drove all the way from Erie, Pennsylvania in 3 hours and a half. You know, as you don't know, I was a police officer. I carry my bags just in case I get stuck. I try not to, but I have on many occasions. Herral and I go way back. We were in the service in the Fort Lab, in the tractor trailer. We were so lucky because we didn't have this camp in a tent when it rained. We just put a red light on the back of the trailer and nobody was allowed to come in. Nobody. None of the officers or anybody else. We had our breakfast in there. We cooked our own eggs. We had a heat kept us warm. It was really a good deal. Every time we went on a bivouac, everybody said, "Can we come over?" And I said, "No, you can't." We were taking pictures, we were printing pictures and stuff like that. But Herral and I were very good friends in the service. We spoke every day. We worked together. The people who met us in different areas found out what we did. We were both photographers. He worked for the Blade. I was an individual person that took pictures. And he stopped us one day and he said to Herral, he said, "The University of Maryland is going to have classes here and we'd like you to teach photography." As you probably knew, Herral, he's very timid on something. He had a problem and he didn't want to talk about it or talk because it was a little bit of a stammer, a little bit of stutter. And he said that, just like if I could recall correctly, he mentioned something to Bruce in regards to the going for a job that he had for, what, 35 years? For that. And they asked, I had understood that they asked Herral, and he said, no, he's not going. He says, that fella can go, and Bruce went. So Herral said the same thing to the University of Maryland, and they said to me, would you teach? And I said, sure. But I said, I come with 2 people. He said, what do you mean? I said, I can talk. I can talk a lot, and he does all the work. So that's what we did. We taught people how to take pictures and how to design the picture and stuff like that, because he was with the Blade for a long time. But Herral and I were also close outside the service. We put our 2 years in Germany, and at the end of the 2 years, most of the people separate and never see anybody else for years and years. But we were such a close-knit organization, we made maps for the Second Army. Every time the Russians moved, we printed out overlays. And so it come down to a point where when we were getting ready to go home, everybody says, well, I guess we won't see you anymore. And everybody was looking around, and I put my hand up and I says, yes, you'll see us. I said, I'm going to hold a reunion next year. And I did. I held a reunion in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, south of Pittsburgh, in the area there. We had all the guys, you can't imagine how many people from all over the country that came there, including 2 guys from this Georgia area with, a couple of gallon of moonshine. So we decided we were going to have it often. And so I was the instigator of locating the different places. We traveled Florida, Indiana, Ohio, all the different places in the Midwest, as far as South Dakota, someplace like that. But we had an awful lot of people showing up. In the beginning it was like 130, 200, and Herral took pictures of everything. And at the end of the day, we would run down and have them printed out because we traveled and we didn't know we couldn't do the work right there. But if some people are here, probably not, but if you went to our reunions, you always went home with a group picture. Printed it for everyone. I remember when I was overseas, I traveled a lot. I had my motorcycle, my car, and Herral, unfortunately for us, wanted to go somewhere. And he says, can I borrow your motorcycle? I said, sure, why not? Everybody else does, you can borrow it. I had just built, and I don't know if, Webbendorfer presses are run on rubber. I built myself 2 saddlebags, stitched them up, did a beautiful job. And when Herral came back, we only had 1. He said, I'm sorry. I said, well, where is it? He says, well, I laid it down and ripped it off. I kept on going. So anyhow, I had to rebuild another one. But we went to Oberammergau. We went to Zugspitz. We went through Switzerland. I traveled through Italy, France, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg. Went over to England, went up to Scotland. Herral did the same, only he traveled by train. We couldn't get out going south or west, east. We couldn't get east because we weren't allowed to cross the Russian borders. Austria, Hungary, and all that stuff like that. Only one person in our whole organization was able to go because he had a family in Greece, and he had an uncle that was a bishop. So they gave him papers, and he went. And while we were overseas, Herral while I was traveling overseas, Herral used to write my mother letters, letting her know where I was. Because I didn't have the time to write because I was traveling so much. I didn't know this until after we got home. But he was one of my best friends. My wife will tell you I started crying, but I didn't want to. But I spent 60 years with him. And so proud to be here.